So in today's Religion Media Centre briefing, we're looking at a report from the Bible Society that says that there is a revival of Christianity in England and Wales. Congregations have risen in the last 4 years from 8 to 12% of the population, and the growth has been largely fueled by Gen Z, and these are young people aged 18 to 24. With 16% of them attending church once a month. That's compared to 4% 4 years ago. The report is called The Quiet Revival, and it was based on a YouGov survey of 13,000 people, which the Bible Society commissioned. So to unpack the report and consider the findings, we're joined by the report authors, Dr Rhiannon McAleer, Director of Research and Impact at the Bible Society, Dr Barward-Symmons, Head of Research at the Theos think tank, and panellist Dr Tim Hutchings from the University of Nottingham, who has specialised in the field of religion, media and culture, Christopher Gasson, who's an author, and he commissioned his own poll from OnePoll when he brought out his most recent book, which suggested that Gen Z and Millennials are more likely to say they're spiritual than older people. So this report resonates with that. Dr Peter Brierley, statistician, who's been collecting and analysing church statistics for 50 years or so. And joining us to put the questions is our own millennial, Jessie, Paktiazay, who's the producer and director at Three Arrows Media. So thank you all very much for joining. And we're going to start, I think, with the report authors. So we'll go to you, Rhiannon, first. So, Rhiannon, people are looking at your report with incredulity, I think it's safe to say, because it does buck the trend of decline in church attendance. So can you explain how robust your figures are and something about the methodology, how the report was done?
Yeah, absolutely. Really happy to do that. Bible Society has been polling with YouGov since 2018. And our first survey was done with just over 19,000 adults. And that is a nationally representative survey of adults in England and Wales. So it's really robust. That is far in excess of an average poll, which will be anywhere between 1,000 and sort of 3,000 people typically. So that gives us a really high confidence in what comes back. We have polled periodically ever since, but in 2024, we repeated the survey at scale. We did it on 13,000 adults in England and Wales. So the YouGov panel is online, but it is incredibly robust. They are an excellent polling company. Again, this was a nationally representative sample, so it's not disproportionately looking at Christians. It is looking at adults. And it is surprising, but we would say that it does very much reflect a trend that is being mirrored in other data sets. Obviously, one of our panelists, Christopher, has explored similar trends that parts of our report reflect. We also have seen stories of Bible sales coming out very recently. And as Bible Society, we are connected into many, many churches, and we have been hearing stories of change for at least 18 months now, if not a little bit longer. So while the scale of this might take some by surprise, and polling can be surprising, it very much fits the story that's been emerging for a while. So I think it shouldn't be seen as anomalous in any way.
Can you give us the evidence that you found is growing, the percentages, and over what period?
Absolutely. When we polled in 2018, 8% of the adult population in England and Wales said they were Christian and attended church at least once a month. That is our standard measure, and we stuck with it. In 2024, this had increased to 12%. But the most remarkable change was among young people, young adults, where this had gone from 4% in 2018 up to 16% in 2024.
I just wanted to ask you a bit about, I guess the thing when I was kind of processing it, and the kind of surprise factor as well was about kind of contrasting it with the census results. But with that, what we were seeing was kind of about people identifying as Christian, and you kind of make I think the difference that this is about kind of practices and and church attendance. Could you just kind of unpack that a bit for us?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. Our survey as a whole actually very much reflects the census. So what the census showed was that those who describe themselves as Christians, so the census question is, what is your religion? And people tick the Christian box. As a proportion of the population, that has been declining. Our data does reflect that. What we see is that the number of people who are within that Christian box, who practice, which the census doesn't measure, a census doesn't measure how often people practice their religion, that is what's increased. So we are not in conflict with the census. And it's one of the things that gives us quite a lot of confidence in the sample, is it does reflect, big sort of national data sets. But it's this, if you have the Christian label, now you are more likely to be practicing. So those who are particularly young people who say they are Christian are active Christians. And that's a really interesting sort of change in dynamic for Christianity in Britain. But that has been emerging for a number of decades now, that what we might call nominal Christianity or non-practicing Christianity is declining. And we are very much kind of backing that up, but suggesting that the growth in active Christianity is the change.
Yeah, and I think just to like drill into kind of the demographics within that, one of the things that stood out to me was about, I think it said 21% of men aged 18 to 24 are regular churchgoers. And I mean, just anecdotally, I'm a millennial, I'm a churchgoer myself. I mean, I've had many a Gen Z friend that I've kind of discipled or mentored or whatever, and there's been a kind of an acknowledgement of the lack of men in church, shall I say. So this was quite a surprise for me, to read. If you could just kind of elaborate on that.
Absolutely, it was surprising to us as well. But there are other data sets in other European countries, and Finland, for example, that are showing an increase male practice. And we would say that in terms of what we're hearing on the ground, we are hearing stories of men coming in to churches, and in that respect, it doesn't feel out there. It does feel like it's fitting a wider trend. But absolutely, we all evaluate data based on our own experiences. And we just need to remind ourselves that we are looking at big national trends here. And it's a really good practice. You know, I am also in the millennial box. I actually realised I don't know personally any 18 to 24. So if we're finding this surprising, we do need to also check in and make sure that, to what extent are we judging this based on our own window? And if we reach out to others, do we see a different story? And for Bible Society, as we have explored this data, we absolutely have heard many stories back from churches that do collaborate or corroborate what we're seeing.
Thank you. Can I bring in Dr. Rob Barward-Symmons? Rob, you are another co-author of the report. We've been hearing there about the increasing number of young men who are coming into churches and becoming members. Is there any explanation in your research as to why that is happening?
It's very difficult from our data to get that certainty of why, of what's triggering this. But we've got some thoughts behind it, and one of which does really link to a few of the data points. Some of them can. So firstly, we think there's been a real cultural shift in openness and the language around being a Christian. And so what we're seeing with these young adults, including those beyond the church, is that there is an openness to not only engaging with Christianity and not only being curious about it, but with Christians talking about it. So our youngest group are those who are most likely to say it's a good thing for Christians to talk about their faith with non-Christians. And that's still the case among non-churchgoers. So there's kind of a new openness to talking about it that we also see reflected in the wider cultural conversation from key influencers as well. The second tier, I think, is obviously in the social conversation at the moment, we're very conscious of the kind of issues that young adults and young people are facing around a loss of meaning, around a sense of isolation, of loneliness, of mental health struggles. And what we're seeing in churchgoers, particularly young churchgoers, is those who are attending church are far more likely to say they feel happy, that their life feels meaningful, they feel hopeful about the future, they feel less likely to get anxious and depressed, and they feel a connection to their community. So among young men, they're 2.5 times more likely to feel connected to their local community if they are as churchgoers. So this the kind of issues that we're very conscious of with young people and young adults at the moment. People are seeking this meaning, they're seeking healing, they're seeking purpose, they're seeking community, and they seem to be finding it within the church.
Thank you very much. I'd like to bring in Dr. Peter Brierley now. Peter, you have been collecting statistics for 50 years or more and producing books and analysing what the churches tell you themselves. Were you shocked when you saw this latest report?
Well, I found it very interesting, and I found that the variation between 2018 and 2024 quite fascinating. There are two other elements in it that I think are very important. The one is the resulting community interaction, not with churches and with people, into the wider community. That seems to be one of the key factors, which is not just highlighted in this report, but in other research as well. The second thing which I think is important, and the report only touches on it slightly, and it talks about the ethnic communities, but the reality is that a lot of what in Scotland are called the diasporan churches are seeing an enormous amount of change. New churches are being started. There is a huge energy process locked within that. A fair chunk of that is Pentecostal. Nevertheless, you have this, well, I call it diasporan is a good enough word, I guess, to indicate some of the important changes that are taking place. So my question was in my mind, here you've got a 2018 situation which was fairly normal in a sense, and you've got a 2024-25 situation which is different. What is there between 2018 and 2025 that's happened which might cause this enormous change? And the answer, of course, is the COVID pandemic. Did the incidence of isolation, of loneliness, especially among some of these younger people, the difficulty of getting a job, difficulty of all the problems that we had with COVID, has that actually helped to cause the changes that are seen? And I think that is an interesting question. You can't prove the answer yes or no from the data that has been given.
Thank you. Shall we ask Rob to answer that? Rob, what's the answer? Is it COVID related?
COVID has obviously shaken the social fabric and really posed quite strong existential questions to a lot of people, and as you point out, particularly among this younger group. And I think the other thing that's worth noting is we are only able in this survey to speak to people over 18, and a huge chunk of the rise has come from these 18 to 24-year-olds who wouldn't have been in this 2018 capture. So it's possible that this actually has been more in motion than we realized among adolescents, among young people who therefore are only showing up in our sample now. That doesn't explain the rise in 25 to 34-year-olds, but as you say, Peter, I think that experience of the pandemic could well be a factor there.
Thanks, Simon. There's a question in the chat box, from Jeremy. Rodell, if that's how you pronounce your surname, Jeremy. This is fascinating data from a high-quality source. It indicates the number of COE and Catholic churchgoers went up substantially between 2018 and 24, yet data from the COE and the Catholic Bishops' Conference indicate that there's been a decline in attendance between those days, and this is a substantial difference. Can you comment?
I think it's important to note that we are using quite different methodologies between counting, which is incredibly difficult. It's incredibly complex if you're doing counts. We are looking at surveys which ask people on average over a year, how often did you say you went to church? There is going to be a difference in what comes out there, but absolutely, this is really, really high quality data. YouGov are probably one of the best and most robust polling companies out there. And so when we look between our data sets, that is the trend and the change that we can comfortably be looking at. Extrapolating from polling to population does come with challenges. So, yeah, we're absolutely confident in what the surveys are showing, and that they are very much reflecting a true and real trend.
Tim Hutchings, you said Jeremy stole your question. Do you want to add anything now?
Exactly as Jeremy has commented in the chat. So that a number of the my question is looking at this: where are these churchgoers going? Because it's all very well to say, well, this is a big, robust survey, but also what the survey is claiming is that there's a rise of something like 50% nationally in churchgoers, and it doesn't look like anyone's noticed this in churches, apart from a bit of anecdotal observation of one church said this and one church said that, and some people are buying Bibles. You would think if the congregation size had gone up by 50%, but so this should be showing up in other data sets. And it sort of is, I think. So reports from the Catholic Church, the Church of England, show a slight rise in attendance over the last few years, but that's since COVID, and it's still well below the pre-COVID level. So what's fascinating about this survey is that it goes back to 2018 and says, no, even benchmarking pre-COVID, something's happened. Of course, the issue is that the denominations, the kind of big organized churches that are reporting statistics in this very organized way, are actually not necessarily the ones that the survey is saying are growing the quickest. So I thought it was very striking in the survey that the rush of 18 to 24s into religion is not a rush into the Church of England, if I've read it correctly. The proportion of those people who are calling themselves Anglican is going down quite a lot. There's a big Catholic chunk, though, which the Catholic Church does not appear to be reporting are in pews. So there's a few possible, if you get into the kind of minutiae of statistics, and I think it would be, I'm reluctant to do that with someone like Peter in the room, who is certainly much more experienced than me at statistical analysis. But it is a self-reported survey. One of the things that's commented on in the report is that it seems like the social desirability of Christianity is changing, the willingness of people to talk about themselves as Christians. And one of the challenges of that sort of any survey, if you're asking people to report on their own practice, is they're a little bit telling you what they think you want to hear or what they'd like to be true about themselves. So Christians will always say, well, I'm the kind of person who prays very regularly, whether or not they do. It could be that there's an effect here of young people feeling more willing to call themselves Christians and to think about themselves as churchgoers. That is perhaps mismatched to some extent with what's actually happening in pews.
I don't know if Christopher wants to come in here as well, because in terms of the poll that you've done, Christopher, and if that that attitude. So yeah.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think first of all, the sort of the most interesting thing is that your poll is actually just completely confirming mine. And when I put mine out, and it was also 10,000 people, also a pretty statistically significant thing. And it also showed that younger people were. We asked a number of, I suppose, slightly different questions. We first asked about spirituality and whether people felt, how spiritual they felt and how they felt their spirituality had changed over the years. And young people basically said they felt more spiritual than older people, and also that they felt they'd become more spiritual. Whereas it seems that that's something that sort of dies a little bit with age. In terms of how, then we also asked how religious people felt, and again, that seems to have arisen. I mean, we asked a little bit in terms of the actual practice. Do you call yourself a Christian but don't actually do anything about it? Do you call yourself a Christian but don't don't attend but don't believe? And we had a whole sort of load of options. But we came across this same thing. The young people claim to be attending church, when clearly they're not. Now, we had quite a lot of data on where the sort of where these people were, and essentially, it is very much in the sort of inner cities, where you probably have more non-traditional churches, where you're seeing these young people claiming that they're going to church when they're probably not. The other thing about our survey was we asked about, we didn't really care about which religion, and the real strong rebirth of religion in this country is among younger Muslims. That is sort of much more marked. I mean, older Muslim people, say that they're Muslim, but a lot of them say they don't really believe in it and they don't go that much. But younger Muslims are absolutely there, and there is a sort of strong feeling of reawakening there. So sort of Christianity is a little bit more of a sort of pale shadow of what's happening among Muslims. But it's certainly, the data which I have, confirms what your survey has said. And I mean, I'm scratching my head just as you are about, when's this all going to show up in the pews?
There was something really interesting in the report that you got to as well, Christopher, which was about an interest in spirituality that may not have any category of belonging at all.
This is something which I think is genuinely sort of the way that religion seems to have gone. Whether it is actually people saying that they are religious or they're saying they're spiritual, there seems to be a sort of a very sort of marked, I suppose, drift away from, being religious and believing what you're supposed to believe. So most Christians don't believe what they're supposed to believe. I mean, they don't follow the authority of the leaders of their church. And then beyond that, there's this larger sort of penumbra of people who are spiritual but not religious. So those two things say that to me that people aren't really sharing what they actually think about God in the way that they in a public forum, in the way they might when they go to church. In the past, one sort of has this vision that people did sort of believe what they're supposed. But that I guess is part of this sort of trend in society where people are becoming, since the war, there's just been less general following of authority, and that's having an effect on churches. I mean, I think going back to one of the points you were making earlier about willingness to talk about religion. Originally, when we went out with this survey, I needed something which would sort of provide a news angle. And we had quite a lot on this willingness to talk, thinking that, it was interesting that people didn't really like to talk about religion, and we were rather surprised that they were happier to talk about religion than we expected. But at the same time, although they're sort of happier to talk about religion, they tend not to, as I say, believe what they're supposed, or when it comes around to spirituality, have all kinds of different beliefs. I mean, another sort of thing that we were asking was, we sort of set up a sort of menu of gods that people could believe in. And it was sort of quite interesting, finding out what people actually wanted from God. The top God from all religions, all spiritualities, was a comforting God who helps through life's difficulties. Next one was a sort of a creator God who made the world. Now that was probably that was particularly popular among Muslim people, but and people who were more strong believers. And then a God of love who grows out of human connection. That was as popular with non-religious people as religious people. And I mean, it's just sort of quite interesting that actually when you step back from religion, what actually people want from God is sort of pretty universal.
There was an interesting comment in the chat that I wanted to bring in there from Emily Hughes, who asked, so what else might be going on with young people? We talk a great deal in religious studies about secularization and the decline of religion, and there are all sorts of theories over 100 years or so of why it is that religion declines in certain parts of the world. One of the dominant recent theories has been that this is about a sense of security. As people feel wealthier, more protected, they feel the healthcare system looks after them, they feel that they're going to get opportunities to express themselves and become leaders in the workplace, their need for religion declines. And of course, what we see at the moment is a breakdown of some of that sense of security, I think, in this country. And around the world, you're seeing a rise of, particularly among young men, a rise of conservative politics, a revival of interest in, well, I don't know if I call it a revival, but certainly an increase in interest in misogynistic and anti-feminist views in many countries around the world. The suggestion there in the chat is that maybe young men becoming interested in Christianity might be part of the same kind of move as becoming interested in nationalism and whiteness and other political movements. I see Robert's got a hand up and may want to respond to that already, but it's certainly something that kind of fits in with the theories that we've been teaching in religious studies over recent years.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I guess just on that quickly, and then I do want to come back to some of the other issues that were raised. We do want to do more probing into these young adults, these young men, but really when we look into that well-being data that I mentioned earlier on, these do not feel like, or churchgoers anyway, do not feel like angry, disaffected young men looking for kind of that sense of power, so much as they've found a sense of contentment, a sense of meaning, a sense of purpose, and they're willing to kind of give back to their communities around them. And what we find actually is that among those well-being metrics, the people who come out lowest are nominal Christians, and so there is much more to explore there. I just want to come back quickly to the line of desirability effect and the assumption that I think Chris raised that essentially, if they're not showing up on our other counts, they must be lying, basically. And I'm really uneasy about that because it's quite an easy thing to throw at younger people and younger adults. And actually, there's always the question of, as I mentioned earlier on, where are these showing up, and are they showing up in churches who actually previously, as people would have found, it's very difficult to do the kind of systematic counts, especially if they're scattered across the numerous denominations and with different institutional structures. So this kind of polling kind of allows a different way in and a different way in. But the other question is, even if there's been a shift in the cultural landscape, what's been so significant in the culture, in the social desirability, that means it wasn't the case in 2018, but is now radically the case, where people are willing not only to kind of fight the numbers on church going, but what we see is across the question. This is a very deep data set. These churchgoers, these young churchgoers, look like churchgoers across the board. They are answering in a way that we would expect churchgoers to answer. Now they have the different slants because each generation does, and each life stage brings its own different slants. But it's not a case wherein they're saying we go to church and then they're not really they're below the surface. They just look like everyone else. It's just they think the answering goes to church.
What is the answer to the question about their visibility and where they've gone? Because if the main denominations are not picking this up, what does that say about whether we can trust your report? If your report's saying one thing, that there's been a very big spike in the number of young people who are joining churches, and the churches are not picking it up, how do you explain that?
With our methodology, this is as high caliber, as rigorous as you can get. Now, as we say, the churches are using a different methodology, and I'd want to, speak to someone from the different units who are undertaking their counts to just see where they what they think about this, where they think there might be weaknesses in there, because it's not easy to do it like for like on a very different methodological approach. So I'm not sure if Rhiannon wants to add to that, but that's kind of, I'd want to dig into it more because it is a curiosity. But from our methodological stance, we're basically as confident as we can be.
Can I bring Peter Brierley in at this point, which is that there's no real benchmark about how many young people attend all churches, is there? There are surveys done by the main denomination, well, the Church of England. The Methodist Church has surveys, but not broken down into ages. The Catholics don't collect data. I haven't seen data from the Pentecostalists. So there's no benchmark at all as to how many Gen Zs or Millennials were in all churches all over England and Wales and in any one year. And should there be, I suppose, is the question.
There's no question that the most recent statistics from the Catholics show a number of dioceses which are quite definitely growing. If you compare the 24 figures with the 25, the 23 and the 24 figures, the number of people wanting to join the Catholic Church is increasing. And in some one or two dioceses, Roman Catholic dioceses, the numbers are actually quite significant. So the Catholics are seeing an increase generally. There's no question either that the published statistics of the Church of Scotland or the Church of England or the United Church or the Methodist Church are not showing decline. Overall, they are showing decline, but in recent years, as has been mentioned, there has been an increase, but the increase is not up to what it was before the COVID years. And if you take the rate of change from the COVID previous years and project it forward, the rate of increase that they are seeing has not yet reached the value that it might have been had there been no COVID. So they are in a situation of decline. There's another factor that has come in, though. When one says, do you go to church, or are you religious, or are you spiritual? And you answer yes. What does that mean? Does that mean that on a Sunday you walk inside some building to worship? Or because since the COVID years, live streaming has come into effect, and a lot of churches live stream their services. So if I just watch a church service once a week, am I religious? Presumably, yes. Am I spiritual? But presumably, yes. Do I go to church? I might well answer yes. And so there may be a factor here that the people who answered the survey say, yes, we go to church, which marries with the fact that you don't see them in the churches don't seem to see them.
Maybe they're all online. It's an interesting theory. Rhiannon, you've come back on the screen. Would you want to interject there?
Absolutely. I think it's really important to underline, though, that all methodologies, including count, have their limitations. Surveys have margin of error, so does the counting methodology. And even if we are out by 1%, the trend is still correct. It's it seems really, really unlikely that we would have something so peculiar. We are reliant on how people interpret that question. And I think the possibilities that Peter raises are really interesting. I would also like to underscore Rob's point that what we see with the young people in the survey is that they are vibrant in their faith. They are there's not much indication. They're just saying that they're Christian because they think it's a good thing to do. They are reading the Bible regularly. They show high Bible hunger. They, on all our attitude questions, they respond really positively. And it is interesting. But I would really challenge, the idea that the churches haven't noticed, because certainly many of them have. And I think it's one of those situations where we absolutely just need to be looking at the bigger picture, and multiple data points really kind of welcome more that's going to come out, and more stories where churches are, seeing the change. But certainly, I mean, to Tim's point on social desirability, it would be fascinating, like that in itself, the idea that it is now socially desirable to say you are Christian, that you read the Bible, that you believe in God, but without any kind of personal change. That in itself is incredibly interesting and, fascinating for sociologists of religion. And I don't think we would have predicted that change. And we also do see in our data set, there is just something a bit different about Gen Z. They are the group who say, who are most likely to agree it's a positive thing for Christians to talk about their faith with non-Christians. They are the age group most likely to say they do a spiritual practice, they pray regularly. They are, among non-churchgoers, the age group most likely to say they're interested in learning more about the Bible. They are the age group of non-churchgoers most likely to say, I'd go to church if invited by a friend. So even outside of the changing churchgoing, there's clearly something different happening around spirituality in Britain and Christianity.
Jessie, I'd like to ask you some questions as our millennial on the screen. Does any of that resonate with you? Is there something really different about Gen Z? I know you're a millennial, so you're in the next category, 24 to 35, but you're close to Gen Z as well. Can you put some flesh on the argument that Rhiannon has just been making and explain for us why this has happened to your knowledge anecdotally in your generation?
Yeah, and anecdotally, and I do in my kind of day job, we're making content primarily for like younger audiences, so kind of teens and below even actually, and some of that being in the religion and ethics space. So kind of very aware of that age group, and I think with Gen Z for me, it is what Rhiannon said. There's an openness that is different. There's a kind of less of a fear about attaching yourself to a specific belief or practice. I mean, I'm interested as well, I think, in really what Christopher looked at as well, with whether that also extends. So where we're seeing Gen Z way more comfortable with saying about praying or being interested in the Bible and going on to church, someone invites them, are they also going to a kind of sound bath experience and Buddhist meditation? And is that also kind of because my experience is that people that I'm having those conversations with, and when I'm talking about kind of content ideas as well in my job, it's a spectrum. It's not necessarily just the pursuit of Christian practices that I would say that the Gen Z have that openness to.
Tim, you're teaching millennials all the time, but we do know that the number of students going forward to study theology and religious studies is declining. It's a battle to keep the numbers up. So how do you explain that there's an increased interest in Gen Z and Millennials for religion, but it's not translating into the study of it?
Well, it's a very recent increase, right? Maybe all of those students are about to sign up in the next couple of years. I think sort of one thing about this kind of statistical analysis, where you do these big national surveys, is because they show up trends that you can't see with your own eyes. And you might get some feel like you spotted something in your local church or your local neighborhood. But it's been, even before this, it's interesting to talk to my own students and say, so why do you think religion is declining or increasing in this country? And they would often say something like, oh, it's a conflict between religion and science. But as we know from census data, the surge of people disaffiliating from Christianity or talking about themselves as people of no religion doesn't happen 100 years ago. It happens in the last 10 years or the last 20 years, which means within the lifetime of people in my classroom. So I can always put it back to them. So, well, people didn't discover the theory of evolution within the last 10 years. You have seen in your lifetime, looking around you, you've seen a generation of people, many generations of people, start to talk about themselves not being Christian when they might previously have called themselves Christians. What's happening? And now we've got this whole new survey to say, well, what I did last year was that the 2021 census was showing a disaffiliation from Christianity. Now we've got this new big survey coming out showing something different. This is your generation. It's the people you're seeing around you doing something different. Which I think makes this such an exciting time to study religion, right? These are unanswered problems, which they sort of fit with some of the theories that we've always had in the study of religion. They don't fit great with some of our expectations and predictions. Something new is happening. Now, universities, I think, have been assuming that a lot of arts and humanities subjects will be declining in interest. They're not as relevant to people. Maybe it's time to close them all down and just do business degrees instead. And I hope that this survey gives a bit of a shot in the arm or a jolt, perhaps, to the whole idea of studying religion. This really reinforces the idea that at schools, religion is of interest to young people, spirituality is of interest to young people, the subject of religious education is important and exciting. And I hope for universities as well, this is a reminder that young people have an interest in this topic. And of course, it might be that the way we teach religion needs to change because of this. I think a lot of theology and religious studies degree programs maybe still have an expectation that you're bringing in somebody with a lifetime of knowledge, and then you're teaching them a new academic way of understanding. Well, this is not the potential students, the young people I think we're seeing in this survey. People who've just discovered an interest in spirituality for the first time might be looking for a very different sort of educational experience. But it gives me a lot of optimism, I think, a lot of hope and excitement for the future.
Just to develop that, there were recommendations in the report about what churches can do. So we've talked about churches not seeing the young people come through in their statistics, at least, of membership. So what can churches do, knowing that there's an interest in religion and spirituality amongst young people? What do they do? And I know we've got representatives of churches on the line, so this is your opportunity to put something in the chat box and share ideas. But going to Christopher, first of all, you do work in a church with young people. What are the lessons of a survey like this to the work of people in churches?
I just wanted to sort of follow on with the previous bit of discussion here that, we also asked what people thought of these churches. And, I have to say, there's quite a lot of widespread horror at the abuse stories coming up in the media about the way, bad things that the church does. And, this actually, we also asked people, what they find, the strongest arguments for religion, for and against religion, and all of the strongest arguments for against religion were not against God; they were all against the way that religions behave. that things like people are absolutely repelled by religious killing and religious violence, and other sort of abuses. I mean, but some of the sort of strangest data is when you really drill down into it. We ask people, how affected are you by these, stories of abuse in the church and so forth. And young people were definitely more affected. It's claimed to be more affected than older people. But having said that, they also said they'd become more religious. So what the hell? There's a lot of strange things going on in people's heads, and this is, the way that I guess that I've been engaging with this is by having a sort of very open mind in terms of the way that I sort of try to draw young people into discussion, in our youth discussion group, and not trying to preempt them by sort of saying what the dogma ought to be, but rather, and this is what my book is based on, is, in our Sunday schools youth discussion group, rather than talking about Bible stories, we took on a different atheist writer each month, and actually went looked at God through that prism, and found that actually people like Richard Dawkins and so forth can help us find a way closer to God rather than further away from God. But it is one of these things where when you read Richard Dawkins, you can see quite clearly that his main beef is not with God, it's with the church. That's that. And this is the thing I think that we have to get to the bottom of. How should we be sort of reimagining church at a time when people are so skeptical of organized religion?
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on a couple of things there that I think actually draw us, interestingly, to the comparison between Gen Z and Gen X in this. And Chris mentioned abuse and kind of new atheism. And I think one of the things that really defined Gen X was the dominance of new atheism in the early to mid noughties, which is largely doesn't have the cultural impact now among emerging generations that it did then. But also with regards to sex and sex abuse scandals, I think at that phase were really, particularly in the Catholic Church, that was the first large-scale scandal to come through, and the abuse that came through really shaped how people perceive the church. Whereas for this generation coming through, their first major encounter with it would have been through the Jimmy Savile affair and the repercussions there. So I think for them, abuse is less specifically tied to the institution of the church and to religion, and more kind of it's everywhere. There's a sense that it's everywhere. So of course it's going to be in the church, and of course it's going to be in politics, and of course it's going to be in media. But it's less specifically tied to religion in a way that I think for older generations it's really embedded in there. But in terms of then looking into what the recommendations for the church, we really focus on listening to and learning from young adults as they come in, and fostering intergenerational conversations that look to kind of understand what is it that's brought them in, what are they looking for, and how can the church learn from and support them in that? How can they, and then looking to grow them in their confidence, particularly around scripture, but beyond that, so they can continue to apply that in their lives. But Rhiannon, I'm not sure if you wanted to add anything else onto that from a recommendations perspective.
I think that's great, Rob. We would just really encourage churches to be aware of this phenomenon and to be on the lookout for it, to create spaces that are welcoming. We really think intergenerational church has a real part to play here. So the energy and the vibrancy and the fresh take of the young adults that we're observing, very much being matched up with that experience of long faith that comes through a lifetime of faith with its ups and downs. And perhaps there's roles for mentoring here, certainly. And absolutely, our survey shows real hunger, both from churchgoers and non-churchgoers, to explore the Bible. So to really kind of encourage churches to make spaces for that, and to not be afraid of that. The Bible still has a place, in Britain in 2025, and people are ready to explore it from multiple angles.
Thanks. Jessie, what can the churches do to respond to surveys like this that show a growing interest in spirituality?
I think I just echo what Rhiannon said. I think it's about maybe as well. I've had this in projects where I kind of work with churches as well, where there's a kind of attitude of like surprise when we see younger people in church buildings. And I think maybe like Rhiannon said, if we're kind of expecting it more, and then it's kind of like, how do we then hear the voices of those people, and what is it that how are they wanting to worship? How are they coming to church, rather than treating it as a phenomenon, I think.
Peter, can I leave the last word with you? As you look at this and you've heard the discussion today, what are the lessons that you draw from this and the headlines to you?
I would say we need the church's mechanism for engaging actively and to serve the local community, if you can. Reaching out to others who don't normally come to church, don't even think of coming to church, but realizing that it's actually helping people in need. And that is a mechanism which redounds with the human spirit. One of the reactions to the cancellation of US aid and the going down from 0.5 to 0.3 here in the UK has been we're losing touch with helping people. One of the things that the church seeks to do, needs to do, is to help people. I was doing a vision building day for a church, and in a small town, and then in that town there happened to be in the high street a vacant shop. And what the people were saying in the church was, please, can we go and take over that shop, not in terms of making a profit, but in terms of being able to show that we serve, we care, we want to help. And I think that's the key issue for helping us to reach out and draw people in.
Well, thank you very much, everybody, for joining that discussion. And I don't know when you're doing your next report, Rhiannon and Rob. This one was 4 years, wasn't it, in the making? But if anyone else on the call is doing a report on anything like this, surveys of young people and spirituality and faith, we'd be very interested in it. Thank you very much indeed for joining the discussion today. Have a great holiday, everybody.